So like I said, lots of wood to chop tonight. We'll see if I make it through the slides. I'm not going to tell you how many there are because you're going to say, nah, you're not making it, dude. But we'll see. So this is Messianic Isaac. In Hebrew, HaAkeidat Yitzchakh, okay, the binding of Isaac. And we want to examine this story and see what we want to do over the next 4 teachings is understand what Adonai intended for us to get from this story. Okay, that's kind of the major goal right there. What does he want us? What is his interpretation? What does he want us to see out of this story? So this is, of course, is in Genesis 22. And the first thing that I want to say is that to many readers of that story, the tale of Akedah is one of the most challenging, complex, mystifying, and perhaps troublesome episodes in the entire Bible. That Adonai would say to Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son. Because all of us know that Adonai hates human sacrifice. So the question is, why did he ask him to do it? So the first thing that I want to do, because most of you, if I asked you, what was the purpose of the binding of Isaac, you guys all come up with an answer, right? Pretty quickly, because most of you will probably say, well, it's Messianic or something like that. First thing I want to do is I want to show you that that there are tons of views about what the binding of Isaac was about. So for instance, critics of Philo's generation, they said, what? They were like, there's nothing extraordinary about Abraham's actions because we have in our own culture those who have done even greater things than Abraham and Isaac, okay? They're like, that's nothing, okay? So for instance, one time the oracle at Delphi required the Athenian Leos, the son of Orpheus, to sacrifice his 3 daughters in order to end a famine. There was a famine, right? So they went to the temple, the oracle of Delphi. You need to sacrifice your daughters. And the daughters, they volunteered, and the father rejoiced to slay them. So the legend goes. So you see, to critics of Philo's generation, they're like, there's nothing, right? Abraham, right? They're like, that's nothing. How about the plague in the region of Messenia? And the lot fell to the daughter of Lysistrata to be sacrificed. But he took his daughter and they fled and they went somewhere else. But a man named Aristodemus, he willingly sacrificed his daughter, right? So this is like, hey, this is willing, right? How about Agamemnon, the Grecian, who was willing to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia to the goddess Artemis before the Trojan War, whereupon the goddess Artemis substituted a hind for her. So these guys are saying, hey, you know what? This idea that Abraham was so great, that's nothing. We've got stories in our history that are greater than that, right? What about Rabbi Yosef ben Kaspi, 14th century Spain? He wrote that, so now we're going to switch gears a little, right? And we're going to look at what some of the Jewish rabbis said about this story. Rabbi Kaspi, he wrote that Abraham's imagination had led him astray, making him believe that Adonai had said, sacrifice your son. And some of you, at least with me, I'm thinking, well, is that not what the scripture says, right? But there are some, so we need to understand that Judaism is not monolithic. They don't all believe, it's just like Christianity. In many ways, right? Christianity is not monolithic. Everyone doesn't believe the same. So it's pretty amazing when you start reading what some of the commentators say. Some of the commentators felt that this was Abraham's punishment for how he treated Ishmael. Remember, he took Ishmael and his mother, gave them piece of bread, loaf of bread and water, and said they had to leave, right? So some people think that was his punishment. Some people say it's a test of his faithfulness. And we know that's true, right? Because in Genesis 22, it says, and Adonai tested Abraham. So that we can see that right there, right? This past week, I was listening. I decided to go on the internet and search, and I found this rabbi. I listened to him for 15 minutes, and he gave a message about the binding of Isaac. And he said that it was to demonstrate the true nature of parenthood that we need to sanctify our children's lives, recognizing that they belong to Adonai. And that's what he got out of it. So you see, depending on who you are, there's a number of different ways you can interpret that story, right? One Midrashic commentator, and we're going to get into the Midrash a little later and specifically tomorrow, he stated that Adonai said, I never considered telling Abraham to slaughter Isaac. Okay? So this is a rabbi. He's like, no, 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 no. You know, he said Adonai never intended that to happen. Rabbi Yonah Aben Yannick, 11th century Spain, he wrote that God only demanded a symbolic sacrifice. Well, that's not what it says. It didn't say, symbolic. As a matter of fact, Rashi, because I have the first five books of the Bible as translated by Rashi with his notes. And what he says in there is Adonai didn't tell Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. He just said, bring him up. In other words, just lift him up, because the word there is the olah, is to elevate something. But it does, no. He said offer him. But see, even Rashi is like, Rashi, he's called the firstborn of Jewish interpreters. And he says, nah, he just told him to bring him up, just take him up there, not to literally sacrifice him. All right, Rabbi J.H. Hertz stated that it teaches us that human sacrifice is abhorrent. Okay, right? I can see that in there, right? You could see that. But the question is, what does Adonai want us to get out of this story? Because with different people, you will get different answers depending on their own experiences. Some viewed Abraham as misguided. Now, I love this one. Some view that Abraham was misguided because when Adonai said, hey, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham became Mr. Intercessor, right? And he was interceding. He says, hey, Adonai, if 50, will you still destroy the city? 40, 30, 20, 10? Yet, when Adonai says, I want you to sacrifice your son, he's like, okay, let's go, right? First thing, early in the morning, right? Early in the morning, Abraham gets up and he's ready to go sacrifice Isaac. And so for some people, they're like, hey, he was misguided. Why would he want to go through all of the prayer and intercession for Sodom and Gomorrah, but when it comes to his son, he's just going to go, right away? You see what I'm saying? So it was an eye-opening to me when I began studying, and preparing for this message here, right? It reminds me of, remember in The Fiddler on the Roof, remember Perchik, the young revolutionary? And he was tutoring Tevye's daughters. And Perchik, he read the story about Jacob's life, Genesis 28 to 32. And he tells them the story, and at the end he said, what is the lesson of this story? What is it meant to teach you? And, they were like, and he said, it means never trust your employers. Because this is around, I think, 1905 or so when, there are all sorts of revolutions going on in Russia where workers were rebelling. So that was his paradigm for reading that story. So when he read the story of Jacob's life, all he came away with was, hey, it's to teach you that you're not supposed to trust your employers, right? Uncle Laban, all right? So it depends. One of the sadder ways that people have interpreted the binding of Isaac is it became a basis for the psychology of martyrdom among Jews, especially during times of intense Jewish persecutions and pogroms. The Akedah was interpreted as a symbol of suffering of Jewish people in a Gentile-dominated world. Okay? It became a paradigm, and they looked to Abraham and Isaac as if they were saying, you will need to suffer in this world. And so that's how they interpreted it. They viewed the Akedah as an example of the sanctification of Adonai's name. Okay? During the Shemad period, that's the Hadrianic Wars, the Maccabean story of the the slaughter of Hannah's 7 sons. How many of you remember that? Have you read that in the book of Maccabees? The 7 sons. They were all tortured to death in front of their mother, and finally she was killed. And so the Maccabean story of the slaughter of Hannah's 7 sons was told anachronistically through the eyes of parents in the Hadrianic in the period of the Hadrianic persecutions, who saw their sons and daughters die during that persecution. And here are some of the things that were said. Their mother wept and said to them, "Children, do not be distressed, for to this end were you created. Sanctify in the world the name of the Holy One, blessed be He. Go and tell Father Abraham, let not your heart swell with pride. You built one altar, but I have built 7 altars, and on them have offered up my 7 sons. What is more, yours was a trial, and mine is an accomplished fact." You see what I'm saying? So you can see how they're looking back to this story. There were Jewish martyrs in Mainz in 1096. And listen to what was written about some of the story about this situation here. "Ask ye now and see, was there ever such a Holocaust as this since the days of Adam? When were there ever 1,100 sacrifices in one day? Each and every one of them watch what they're doing here. Each and every one of them like the Akedah of Isaac." You see? So Isaac's Akedah is seen as in a psychology of martyrdom. Each one like the Akedah of Isaac, son of Abraham. "Once at the Akedah of one on Mount Moriah, the Lord shook the world to its base. O heavens, why did you not go black, O stars?" And it continues, "Why did you not withdraw your light, O sun and moon? Why did you not darken in your sky when in one day 1,100 pure souls were slain and slaughtered? Oh, the spotless babes and sucklings, innocent of all sin, oh, the innocent lives. Wilt thou hold thy peace in the face of these things, Adonai?" And what they're saying is, you know what? When it came to the binding of Isaac, when Abraham was willing to slay Isaac, an angel called out on high and said, "Hey, do not touch the lad." And so what they're saying here is, Adonai, we have 1,100 people that was slaughtered, and why did you not do anything about that? All right, from the synagogue poetry of that generation in 1096. Again, watch how they make reference to the Akedah. "O Lord, mighty one, dwelling on high, once over one Akedah, Ariels cried," and angels cried out over that one binding. "But now how many are butchered and burned? Why over the blood of the children did they not rise a cry?" They rose a cry over Isaac when they said to Abraham, "Do not touch the lad, do not harm him," but why not now? Before that patriarch could in haste sacrifice his only one, it was heard from heaven, "Do not put forth your hand to destroy." But now how many sons and daughters of Judah are slain, while yet he makes no haste to save those butchered, nor those cast on the flames. Okay. And so you see, just like, they're interpreting that in light of their sufferings. Okay, how about this? From the Peyetanim, the liturgical poets of that era. "How the outcry of the children rises. Trembling they see their brother slain. The mother binds her son lest he be blemished as he startles. The father makes a blessing before slaughtering the sacrifice. To their mothers in grief, the tender children say, 'Offer us up as a whole burnt offering.' We are wanted on high. With their fathers, the sturdy young men plead. 'Quick, hurry to do the Creator's will.' His father tied him who was offered on Mount Moriah, who prayed he should not kick and disqualify the slaughter, but we, without being tied, are slain for his love." Okay? And so again, they viewed the binding of Isaac as a paradigm of how they would suffer in the world. And so the Jewish people appropriated the story of the binding of Isaac as the paradigm to understand their own sufferings in the world. And so Isaac and Abraham, they're seen as like examples. They're seen as examples of how the Jewish people would need to do that. Okay? We're going to look at one more. The slaughter of Jews in Worms, Germany, where hundreds of Jewish people were killed in a 2-day period. It says many of them slew each other, and many of them committed suicide. What happened is the townspeople descended upon them. They had all gathered in one place trying to save their lives. And the townspeople gathered, and when it became obvious that the townspeople were going to kill them, they began to kill each other and commit suicide. It's just like Masada, like what happened at Masada, right? Because they didn't want to fall into the hands of the heathen. There's a story of Rabbi Meshullam. He had a wife named Zipporah who had been barren her whole life. And in her old age, so this is true, in her old age, she bore a son, and they named him Isaac. And it says here, and he said, and in a loud voice, he called out to all those standing by and to his lifelong companion, Mistress Zipporah, all ye great, and to whom my wife Zipporah gave birth in her old age, Isaac is the child's name. And now I shall offer him up as Father Abraham offered up his son Isaac. You see, as they're doing that. Solomon Bar Samson records on the testimony of the elders who were eyewitnesses and ear witnesses to the events of 1096. And Zion's precious sons, the people of Manes, were put through the 10 trials like Father Abraham. So the story of Abraham, it is said that he had 10 tests. And you see how now they're applying that here. They too offered up their sons exactly as Abraham offered up his son Isaac. There were 1,100 victims in one day, every one of them like the Akedah of Isaac, son of Abraham. Okay? And from the writers of the dirges and poetry of that era, compassionate women in tears, with their own hands slaughtered, as at the Akedah of Moriah. Innocent souls withdrew to eternal life, to their station on high. Let not your foes triumph, let the martyr's blood spatter your royal purple. They offered up sacrifices, they prepared victims like Isaac, their father. Okay? And those are just a few of the examples. Few of the examples. Amen. And the suffering of the Jewish people. And we know it's not over with. And it's rearing its ugly head even now today. So Adonai, have mercy. In Yeshua's name, have mercy. So I want to talk about so that was the psychology of martyrdom. I want to talk about a different twist in the interpretation of the Akedah. And it was the notion that Isaac was literally killed and resurrected, right? Because we know the story doesn't say that happened. The story says that the angel stayed Abraham's hand, and he released Isaac, and he sacrificed the ram in Isaac's place. But in the Jewish writings, there was the notion that Isaac was actually killed and resurrected. Some modern Jews note how some of the medieval Jewish rabbis saw resurrection in the story of the Akedah. Okay, so some modern Jews have looked at the literature, and they're looking at how, during medieval times, there were a number of Jewish rabbis that noted how they saw resurrection in the story of Akedah. One account from rabbinic literature speaks of how Isaac was actually slain, where no angel intervened, and then the sacrifice of Isaac, and then he was healed and resurrected. So let's look at this. Now, what some of the modern rabbis have said is that this is a case of what I call Jewish one-upmanship, and you'll see what I mean here. So what they said is that some of the Jewish rabbis of the medieval century, of the medieval time period, they didn't want to be outdone, and so they embellished the story of the Akedah, saying, yeah, he was killed and he was resurrected. and they included aspects of Isaac's resurrection to make the point that there was nothing special about the crucifixion of Yeshua. Because, see, remember during that time with the Christians and the Crusades and everything, and Christians are trying to, quote unquote, witness to them. And so what happened is a number of Jewish rabbis, they began to talk about Isaac's his Akedah, as a one-up on Christians. Because, in other words, there was nothing, just like the critics of Philo's generation, remember the critics of Philo's generation? Right, you know? So what a lot of Jews were saying during the medieval times, they're like, oh, there's nothing special about this crucifixion of Yeshua. Because the Jews, we also had a special person, right, who had a miraculous birth, you see? And they said, we had a special person who had a miraculous birth, who carried his own wood, right, to his sacrifice. There's nothing special about Yeshua. And he atoned for the sins of his people through his death. And he secured grace and favor and mercy for the Jewish people. So in other words, some of the rabbis of the medieval people, they were like, this Jesus thing, right? Crucifix, we got all this. We got this. And as a matter of fact, unlike Yeshua, who said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Isaac willingly went to be sacrificed, you see, right? Okay. So, but not all of the Jewish rabbis accepted the idea that Isaac was killed and resurrected. Okay, so we're about to get into this dichotomy here, and it's almost like kind of schizophrenia, where you have a number of Jewish rabbis who are saying, yes, Isaac was killed and resurrected, and then you have another group of rabbis that are like, no way, Scripture doesn't say that. So we're just kind of seeing it. It's again, Judaism is not monolithic. But some of the Jewish rabbis of the modern era, they looked back at what some of the Jewish rabbis said during the medieval times, and they were like, no. This whole idea about resurrection and resurrection of Isaac, that unusual version of the Akedah, it originated during the early centuries of Christianity, when the supreme sacrifice of the Christian Messiah was invoked as evidence of the superiority of the Christian God over the Hebrew God, right? And that's kind of that's what Christians did. That's what the many of the church fathers did. They were trying to show how Christianity was a better religion than Judaism, okay? All right? So some believe that the notion of resurrection being taught in the Akedah grew as a response to Christian polemics, okay? Back when they had the disputations and things like that, where they would have debates. And so there's this question about, when did all these ideas that Isaac, in Jewish writings, that Isaac was literally, that he was literally sacrificed and resurrected? Ibn Ezra, 11th to 12th century, he asserts that Abraham slew Isaac, and he said, but he who asserts that Abraham slew Isaac and abandoned him, and that afterwards Isaac came to life again, is speaking contrary to Holy Writ. And of course, that's true, right? Because the Bible does not say that, all right? Furthermore, many modern Jews reject the notion that a person can obtain favor, mercy, grace, and forgiveness on the basis of a vicarious sacrifice of someone else. There are many Jews who don't accept that. They're like, it's pagan. The whole idea that one person can die and everyone gets forgiven is a pagan concept. All right? And as a matter of fact, to some Jewish people, the whole idea that Isaac died and resurrected, they think that's just crazy, right? All right, they think it's crazy. All right, and I'm going to give you an example. Many Reformed Jews, all right, so in the Amidah, the second prayer it's attributed to Isaac, okay? And it's all about resurrection. And because of the story of Isaac's resurrection is so closely associated with Christianity, and of course, all of us, we know why the story of Isaac's Akedah is so closely connected to Christianity, right? Because it all foreshadowed Yeshua, but the Jewish people don't believe that. But because of it's so closely identified with Christianity, and many Reformed Jews are basically liberal. And they don't even believe the scripture, right? And they don't even believe in a literal bodily resurrection. And so many modern Jewish congregations, they changed the wording of that second blessing from he who revives the dead to he who gives life to all. In other words, the last line in the blessing is, blessed are you, Adonai, who resurrects the dead. That's the last line of the prayer. Baruch atah Adonai, machayeh hametim is the last line of the prayer. But what many Reform congregations do is they change that from blessed are you, Adonai, who resurrects the dead. They change it to blessed are you, Adonai, who gives life to all. You see. So they changed that. Okay? When we're going to see how that's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. All right? So enter the Midrashim. So let's talk. Before we started today, when we had our technical difficulties, we were talking about the Midrashim. So let's look at them. The Midrashim, what are they? They are a vast collection of Jewish writings that delve into the interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. Okay? They were written, these Midrashim, these stories were written to try to help interpret the Bible. There are two main sets of teachings. The Halakha focuses on the legal aspects of how to interpret the Torah. So there are many stories that the rabbis tell, and all these stories are dedicated to how do we interpret the Torah in this situation? How do we interpret the Torah in that situation? All the legal aspects. But there's another body of literature called the Agadah or the Haggadah, and it's more narrative-driven, and it offers moral lessons, historical background, and very imaginative stories that expand on the biblical stories, right? And so they're so imaginative that you could say that they're somewhat fanciful, right? And they are extremely embellished stories from the Bible, okay? And you've already heard that one of the midrash says that Isaac, we talked about it before we taught today that, Isaac was killed, Abraham killed him, he was resurrected, and he spent 3 years in heaven being healed of his wounds, right? So that's one of those midrashim, okay? But here's the point. I want you to understand this. They are not to be taken literally. I don't care how many Jewish people or rabbis I don't care how many rabbis tell you that they literally happen, because some Jewish rabbis, they teach that the midrashim are literal. Okay? On the other hand, there are Jewish rabbis who know that they're not to be taken literally, okay? So I've read some of their articles. I read one article from a Jewish rabbi teacher, and he is bemoaning the fact that many rabbis say, well, the Midrashim are literal, because the Midrashim, they contradict what the Torah says, right? They contradict what the Torah says. The Torah didn't say that Isaac was literally killed and resurrected and taken up into heaven for 3 years, or that during the 3 years he was off studying the Torah in the house of Shem. That's another one. I didn't tell you about that one, right? That didn't happen, right? So they're not to be taken literally. But the Midrashim concerning the Akedah, they add many nuances to the story in Genesis 22, and especially two ideas. There's two ideas. Number one is many of the Midrashim, they connect Isaac's Akedah to Passover, right? Remember I was telling you guys about that. And the other thing is they say that they connect Isaac's Akedah to resurrection from the dead. And those are going to be the two main areas that we're going to focus on in this teaching, okay? So I read a book entitled The Last Trial by Shalom Spiegel. He is a Jewish professor. He's not alive anymore, but he wrote a book about the whole idea of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. And his goal was to thoroughly study Jewish literature to determine exactly when and why the idea that Isaac had died and resurrected came about, okay? He wanted to find out, search through Jewish literature. He spent a lot of effort tracing the notions of resurrection in the Akedah as these ideas appeared in the Midrashim. And this guy, he's he was a very well-known scholar in his area of study, okay? And so he went back and he looked at various Jewish midrashim. And so, for instance, in one midrash called Shibbolei HaLechet, it's a midrash on the Amidah, all right, the Shemona Esrei, the 18 prayers, specifically the second prayer. And so, as I said, the end of that second prayer is Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim. Blessed are you, O Lord, who resurrects the dead. And it says, Rabbi Judah says, when the sword touched Isaac's throat, his soul flew clean out of him. And when he let his voice be heard from heaven, and when he let his voice be heard from between the two cherubim, lay not thy hand upon the child, the lad's soul returned to his body. Then his father unbound him, and Isaac arose, knowing that in this way the dead would come back to life in the future. Whereupon he began to recite, Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim. You see. And so what they're doing is they embellish the story of the binding of Isaac. And what they're saying is, you see what they're saying. They're saying that his soul flew out of him. Now, in this particular midrash, they weren't saying that Abraham killed him and then he came to life. They're just saying, hey, when the knife touched his neck, his soul flew out of him and he died. It flew out of him. And then it came back. And then he said, this is how the resurrection of the dead is going to be. Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim. And so they attribute to Isaac as if he came up with that second benediction. He didn't. Isaac didn't come up with the second benediction. They treat it as if he did, okay? All right, Rabbi Judah of Barcelona. When Father Isaac was on the point of being sacrificed as a free will whole burnt offering, he beheld the light of the Shekhinah, and his soul flew out of him, but the Holy One, blessed be he, revived him. And he went on to, once he was revived, they say that Isaac said, Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh HaMetim, right? Again, this is another midrash, not true, but the question is, with Rabbi Judah of Barcelona and the previous rabbi, where did they get the idea that Isaac died and was resurrected? That's the important point right there. There was some reason why they even got that idea, even though it's not written in that story. And that's what we're going to discover this weekend. We're going to find out exactly where they got the idea. And once we see it, I 100%, I guarantee you, it's like, yes, this is how it happened. Once you see it, it's pretty obvious. How about this? When Father Isaac was bound on the altar and reduced to ashes, listen to this. When Father Isaac was bound on the altar, because the other ones, they just said, hey, his soul flew out of him, and then it came back and he revived. Now listen to this one. This is taken a little further. When Father Isaac was bound on the altar and reduced to ashes, and his sacrificial dust was cast on Mount Moriah, the Holy One, blessed be he, immediately brought upon him the dew and revived him. Okay? So now this one seems to say, hey, it says that he was brought to ashes, right? It says that he was brought to ashes. All right? So the author of the book that I'm talking about, the last, what did I say the name was? The Last Trial, his name is Shalom Spiegel, and what he's doing is he's tracing these midrashim, and he says this midrashim predates the medieval times. Therefore, the notion of Isaac being resurrected was not invented as a response to Christianity. Remember, I told you earlier that many rabbis, they said, hey, the whole idea that Isaac died and he was resurrected, that was all as a response to Christianity. And Shalom Spiegel said, no, it's not. He said, because I'm looking at the Midrashim, and I know when they were written, and this predated Christianity. You see what I'm saying, right? Okay? How about the time period of the Amoraim? In Jewish history, there were certain time periods of the rabbis, and they gave them names. So the Amoraim, those were the rabbis of the Talmud from 200 to 500 of the Common Era in Babylon and Israel, okay? And so during these periods, we see the notion of merit being gained through the ashes of Isaac's quote-unquote sacrifice. Again, so some kind of way, these rabbis are seeing that, you know what, Israel can gain merit and favor and blessing as a result of Isaac being sacrificed on Mount Moriah. And in these midrashim here, they're not going to say that he literally died and brought to ashes, but they're going to say it is as though Isaac died and had been reduced to ashes. And I want you to keep that phrase, as though. It was as though he were though he were sacrificed and resurrected, because that's going to be a recurring theme, not only in what the rabbis say, but especially in what we say when we find out the answer as to why they did these things. All right, Rabbi Eliezer ben Pettit said, although Isaac did not die, so see, in this case, he's saying, he didn't die. But what does he say? Scripture accounts it to him as though, there it is, as though he had died and his ashes lay upon the top of the altar. Well, where did he get that idea from? Okay, where did he get that idea from? And that's what we're going to be looking at. Here's another example of another midrash. Whenever the children of Isaac sin and as a result come into distress, let there be recalled to their merit the Akedah of Isaac, and let it be regarded by thee as though, there's that phrase, his ashes were heaped on the top of the altar. And again, Abraham requested of the Holy One, blessed be he that as long as Israel makes mention of Isaac's Akedah before him, it continues to serve as an atonement for them, as though Isaac had been burned atop of the altar. Okay? Again, so we're seeing each one of these is a separate midrash. So we're seeing all these different midrashes where they're either saying it's as though he died and was resurrected, or they're saying he did die and he was brought to ashes. But again, even with the time period of the Amoraim, Shalom Spiegel says these midrashim, they predate the period of the Amoraim. Thus, the idea of Isaac's sacrifice providing the basis of Israel securing favor, grace, and mercy and merit were not invented as a response to Christianity again. Okay? All right. How about the period of the Tanaim? Okay? That's 0 to 200 of the Common Era. Before it was about 200 to 500. Okay? Now, during that period, he saw many midrashim that promoted the idea that Isaac actually lost blood. Okay? There were a number of midrashim that Isaac lost blood. And Abraham bound him on the altar and then took the knife in order to slaughter him until a quarter of his blood left him. Okay? A midrash. This is a midrash. How about this one? And there were Abraham's eyes on Isaac's eyes, and Isaac's eyes on the very heavens, and tears falling, pouring from Abraham's eyes until he stood virtually to his height in a pool of tears. You see the embellishments. He said to Isaac, my son, since you have already begun to give up a quarter of your blood, may your Creator appoint some other victim in your place. And then that's when the ram was brought in. Okay? Again, a midrash. Another, come now and carry out the will of your Father in heaven. May it be his will that a quarter of my blood serve as an atonement for Israel. So again, it's combining the ideas of Isaac's blood being an atonement for Israel and the fact that he was literally that died. Again, Spiegel says that these midrashim, they predate the Tanaim. Thus, the idea of Isaac losing blood on the altar, that wasn't invented by Christianity either. So at this point, let's look at a particular midrash called the Makilta de Rabbi Ishmael. It's a midrash around the time period of the Amoraim again. And this one, this midrash, it connects the binding of Isaac, Akedat Yitzchakh, to Passover. And this is the one that I was telling you guys about before we started teaching. In this midrash, you find this line, and when he sees the blood, okay, that's taken from the Passover account, because Adonai says when he sees the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel, but this midrash says, and when he sees the blood of Isaac's Akedah. Okay? So there's for some reason, the rabbis were connecting Isaac's Akedah with the whole idea of Passover. Now, we're going to get into this quite a bit tomorrow. I just want to introduce it now, but for now, what I want you to do is I want you to just see how, for some kind of way, the rabbis, they connected Isaac's Akedah to Passover. Okay? So Spiegel notes in his book the many connections between Isaac's Akedah and Passover, and he notes that there are lots of connections connecting Isaac's Akedah with resurrection. Those are the two areas we're going to focus on. He noted their presence in some of the most ancient writings, okay, of the sages of Israel. Okay, all right. So let's look at some of these comparisons here between the Christian between Yeshua's crucifixion and the Akedah. So Spiegel, he notes many similarities. So he notes, hey, Yeshua died right at the time of Passover, which is associated with Isaac's birth. So he said, hey, there's an association there. There's also an association with the substitutionary death whereby one gains merit or favor, right? Merit for Israel because of Isaac's Akedah versus merit for the whole world because of Yeshua's shed blood. So he's noticing these parallels, and he says, hey, the favored son, Isaac, versus the beloved father, the beloved of the father, Yeshua, the one and only son. And I didn't know this, but apparently in Jewish literature, there are certain epithets originally associated with Isaac that are used with Yeshua. So in other words, from what Shalom Spiegel is saying, the whole idea of the Lamb of God, that was something that had already been attributed to Isaac in a sheep bound for the slaughter, you see. So, and the whole idea of atonement through Yeshua's blood versus atonement through Isaac's blood, forgiveness through the blood of Yeshua versus forgiveness through Isaac. So he's noticing all these connections, the resurrection of the dead, Isaac being resurrected, Yeshua being resurrected. And so what Spiegel does is he chides Jewish scholars who try to say that the themes of Passover and resurrection that the rabbis wrote about in connection to the Akedah, he chides them who would say that those themes were only the result of Christian influence. He says, no. This is not just Christian influence, because many of these themes he has seen in the Jewish literature from antiquity. And so what's his bottom line? Once Christianity came on the scene, Judaism suppressed the images of merit, atonement, forgiveness, and resurrection based on Isaac's Akedah. Remember, as I told you, there are many Jews today who don't agree with this. Okay? They don't agree that Isaac resurrected. They don't agree that he literally died. They don't agree that they have issue, with that prayer. Blessed are you, Adonai, who resurrects the dead. No, it's blessed are you, Adonai, who gives life to all. They have issues with that. Okay. And so, what Shalom Spiegel, he has noticed that many Jews have suppressed these ideas about Isaac being resurrected. They have suppressed these ideas about Isaac being associated with Passover and that his death secures merit for Israel. And so Spiegel says, although Judaism suppressed those images in the Middle Ages, what he said is that Judaism borrowed them again in the disputations against Christianity. So remember earlier, I said during the disputations in the mid-century, a lot of Jewish rabbis, they did point out these connections. And so he's saying that although they had been suppressed when it came to these disputations and things like that, they kind of recovered that and began to use them. So this is something right here where we're going to see where Mr. Spiegel, where he gets a little off here. So how does Spiegel, how does he handle the fact that the earliest writings of the sages of Israel made all of these associations between Isaac's Akedah and Passover and Isaac's Akedah and resurrection? You see the question I'm asking? So in other words, what he's saying is, look, All of you Jewish rabbis that are saying that all these associations between Isaac and Passover and Isaac and the resurrection, all of my fellow Jewish rabbis who are saying, oh, that all just came as a result of Christianity's influence, he's saying that's not true. And the reason why it's not true is because this is all written in our own literature from antiquity. And so now the question is, why does he think that it's there? Okay, so where did it come from? Where did those ideas come from? He attributes it all to the notion that the connection between Isaac's Akedah and Passover and the connection between Isaac's Akedah and resurrection is a result of the influence of paganism. Okay, you see that? So because he's like, it's in the literature, right? And it's in the literature of antiquity, and we're about to see what I mean by antiquity. Here are some of his direct quotes. I'm just going to read these. Despite all the echoes of theme and vocabulary from the Holy Scriptures with which the earliest Christian fathers tried to surround their faith, in it there was a continuation and a return of ancient pagan beliefs. The idea of the atonement and forgiveness of an entire community by means of the blood of the firstborn sacrificed in the first spring month harks back to that dim pagan antiquity which made it a practice to sacrifice the firstborn on the first new moon of the year to appease and propitiate the gods, to ward off wrath and anger and fury and destruction and waste. The host of sinister angels who stand on the threshold of the new year to ravage and overthrow. They can be appealed to. They can be made to retreat by means of a minimal gift of the sacrifice of human firstborn. Thus, the many are saved and the whole community is forgiven and escapes through the blood of one. You see what he just did there? All of those associations between Isaac and Passover, and even the time period of Passover in the spring. What he did is he also knows about ancient pagan rituals, and apparently in pagan rituals they used to sacrifice their firstborns right around the time of spring. And so what he's saying is all of this stuff that's in our Midrashim, it came from paganism. Here we go. We have found relics of this pagan inheritance also in the Haggadah. See, he's admitting it's in Jewish writings. And he says of the blood of Isaac's Akedah. The question, therefore, is only natural. Did this idea reach us in Christianity from a common pagan source, an inheritance from the remote past before Scripture came into being, or did it reach us from Christianity, from direct contact with it and under its influence? I want you to hear what he said about the Apostle Paul. It was especially the Sicilian disciple, by trade a tent maker in the city of Tarsus, who assailed the law and the commandments with singular vehemence. It is he who wove together an entire system of forgiveness of sins without works of the law from a hybrid mixture of Jewish messianic hopes and pagan notions of God's dying and returning to life in recurring cycles. You see? So this is his explanation. He said Jews, Christians neither escape pagan influences. Pagan legends and fancies regarding gods who died from the death and rose again to life shaped the redemption mythos of the Christians. Is it not conceivable that nothing of this ancient heritage or of the pagan milieu survived and settled in Judaism as well? This may explain, at least partially, a number of parallels in the accounts by the two faiths of the happenings at Moriah and Golgotha. So he's saying, hey, you know what? Christianity was under the influence of paganism, and he says, you know what? Judaism was under the influence of paganism also. Now we know that that's not the case. That's not the case. That's not where these ideas came from. Okay, these ideas did not come from there. One more parallel in the line of the narratives of the Akedah and the crucifixion is that both are tied to the idea of resurrection of the dead, even as he rose on the third after his burial, as recounted in the Gospels. Christian literature is brimful on this subject of resurrection. Notice what he says, in our sources there are only hushed hints. Okay? Now it may be hushed hints in their sources, but it's not a hushed hint in their source, which is the Torah and the prophets, because we're going to see that tomorrow. We're going to see that there is a ton of information about death and burial on the third day in the Bible. We're going to see that. And again, I think this is, okay, yeah. I wanted you guys to hear this. Now, he's going to quote from Hosea chapter 6, verse 2. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up that we may live in his presence. That is Hosea chapter 6, verse 2. Notice what he says about it. Was already an old saying in the days of the prophet, because apparently he was able to see in literature of the time or what have you that was so. And he said it was taken over from ancient fasting and mourning customs to express the hope of the people's rising again after its defeat and downfall in the days of Rezin and Ben Remaliah. And quite possibly, even at the date of this imagery and manner of speaking were so customary and common that no one was sensitive any longer to their pagan roots or origin. He's saying that Hosea 6:2 was pagan in origin. And see, part of the reason why he's doing that is because he doesn't see how the Torah teaches about death, burial, and resurrection on the third day. And that's what we'll spend the next 3 days, the next 3 lessons looking at that. It's all over the place. And we're going to see it in living color starting tomorrow morning, all right? Last phrases here about him. Let's see. At all events, here is clear testimony, continuing about Hosea 6:2, that at least as early as the 8th century, that's about when Hosea, I think he's saying Hosea was written, before the Christian era and the birth of Christianity, pagan concepts of God's dying and returning to life and countless cycles of death and life were widely known among the people, because he's saying Hosea 6:2 is pagan. Out of such beliefs sprouted the hopes and the traditions of ancient peoples that perhaps for mortals too, it might be possible to gain the lot of an endlessly renewed life. Such hankerings and conceits were at the very center of the religious life of the ancient Near East, and they achieved genuine popularity in the pagan festivals, so that they became a commonplace in the whole ancient world, and some dust from the world of idolatry settled on us as well. This leftover from the province of heathendom, which was of minor consequence in Israel, became the central concern of the Christians who sought to restore it to its pristine power and relevance. Be all this as it may, even this parallel between Moriah and Golgotha does not establish necessarily a straight line of dependence or mutual influence, and it may even be that the underlying notions are much older, going back to a common heritage of pagan beliefs. And so that's why he says, hey, in the Midrashim, it's full of all of this stuff. And he said, you know what? It's because of paganism. So he concludes that the themes of merit, atonement, and resurrection from the dead, and the connections between Isaac's Akedah and the firstborn was picked up by Judaism and Christianity from paganism. Okay? All right? So case in point, Isaiah 53. Modern rabbis state that Isaiah 53 refers to the people of Israel living in an antagonistic Gentile world. That's how many rabbis interpret Isaiah 53. They don't interpret Isaiah 53 as the Messiah suffering. They say that the suffering servant in Isaiah 53 is the Jewish people. That's how many rabbis interpret that. But has that always been so? According to Arnold Fruchtenbaum, and Jesus was a Jew, Isaiah 53 was actually the basis of the Messiah ben Yosef doctrine. Remember, the Jews, they taught that there would be 2 Messiahs, a Messiah ben David and a Messiah ben Yosef, where David was the ruling, conquering king, and the Messiah ben Yosef was the suffering servant. And if you look at the Targums are translations with interpretation. In other words, the Targums, they did not translate the Torah literally. What they did is they gave a translation, but they added into it they added into the translation how they thought that the scripture was interpreted. So I'm going to give you an example. In Isaiah 52:3, it says, "Behold, my servant Messiah will prosper." Okay, well, in Isaiah 53, it doesn't say my servant Messiah will prosper. It just says my servant will prosper. But back at the time when the Targum was written, that's what they were thinking, that it was Messiah. But again, as I said, many Jewish rabbis today, they're like, no. This doesn't have anything to do with Messiah. This is the Jewish people. You see what I mean? This is what Shalom Spiegel was talking about earlier, where, that there's hushed hints, right? Where we kind of suppress certain truths. Right? So they're suppressing the truth that the earliest in the Targums, right? They understood Isaiah 53 to be about the Messiah. Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, Seville, Spain, although he didn't agree with Isaiah 53, so here we have one rabbi who wants to be truthful, right? That didn't come out right. We have this rabbi that wants to be truthful, right? He says, although he didn't agree that Isaiah 53 pertained to Messiah, this is what he said, but this is also the opinion of our learned men in the majority of the Midrashim. In the majority of the Midrashim, they looked to Isaiah 53 and they said, this is about the Messiah, right? And the Midrashim were written when? Way long ago, right? Even before the Common Era, all right? In Targum Yalkut, they attribute Isaiah 52:13 to the Messiah. The Midrash Kohen attributes Isaiah 53:5 to the Messiah. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, the Ramban, he attributed Isaiah 53 to the Messiah. So even though many modern rabbis may say, oh, this doesn't mean the Messiah, this is the Jewish people suffering in a Gentile-dominated world, that's not the case from antiquity. And in antiquity, they believed that it was actually Messiah. The first person to suggest that Isaiah 53 pertained to the people of Israel was Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki Rashi in 11th century France. Right? He's the one that he came up with the idea, no. This isn't about Messiah. This is about the Jewish people. Rabbi Moshe Cohen Ibn Crispin of Cordoba in Toledo in Spain, he reacted vehemently to Rashi's interpretation and said it's fancied and far-fetched that Isaiah 53 pertains to the Jewish people. He's like, that's not right. And that was not the traditional view. All right? This is my last slide. I told you at the beginning, how much time I got? Okay, cool. I like that. But this is the last slide, okay? Do you guys see how many slides we went through? All right, we're just laying a line. We're laying some road here. So what have we done? We've seen that there are tons of interpretations of the binding of Isaac, right? Everything from that's nothing, right? To hey, he died and was resurrected. Oh, he's connected with Passover. To it's all paganism, right? We've seen everything. And, of course, the psychology of martyrdom. We've seen that too. So there's all sorts of interpretations of the Akedah. So our task for the remainder of this series, so we've got 3 teachings tomorrow, is to answer these two questions right here. And you do not know how much it delights me to be able to give these messages, especially the 3 tomorrow. I cannot wait to give these 3 messages because they are profound. They're profound. And as you guys have already seen, the rabbis of antiquity, they were, because again, as I said, notice how close all of those midrashims were to the truth of Yeshua. You saw how close they were. The whole idea that Isaac died and resurrected, right? How did they figure that out, right? How did they figure that out? And we're going to see tomorrow. So our task is to answer 2 questions. Number 1, why are the midrashim, as embellished and fanciful as they are, why are they so close to the truth of the gospel? Now, of course, some of it is kind of far, a little far off. Yes, he gave a log. He when a knife touched his neck, he let out a log of blood. One of them said, right? However much a log is, I'm not sure, right? So, not everything, but the whole idea that Isaac died and was resurrected, Isaac carried his own wood. Does that sound familiar? Of course. And the rabbis were keying in on it. That's the first question we need to answer, and we'll do that. We'll do that. And the second question is, what does Adonai, what does our Father in heaven, what does he want us to learn from the story of the binding of Isaac? What is his interpretation? How does he want us to look at it? And hopefully we'll be able to do that. Okay, hopefully we'll be able to do that tomorrow. So the book, I recommend the book wholeheartedly. If you want to study about Jewish midrashim and just see the many of them, it's called The Last Trial by Shalom Spiegel. It's on the legends and lore of the command to Abraham to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, the Akedah. It's just a wonderful book. And of course, the conclusions, right? I don't agree with his conclusions. But most of the material for this first teaching of the four came from that book. It would have been almost impossible for me to find all of these midrashim. I wouldn't know where to start, right? And so, praise Adonai, he's already done it for me. But those will be our two questions. These midrashim, why are they so close to the truth of the gospel? And second of all, what does Adonai want us to know? So we're going to do that in the remaining three messages, and it is the delight of my heart to deliver those three messages in Yeshua's name. Amen.